HR, are they our friends?
What made you think they were your friend?
Ooh, good question.
Was it because they were HR professionals, or was it because you just thought you had a connection?
Also would not be surprised if there's other reasons that for which we are using AI as an excuse. I think there were a lot of companies that used like the pandemic as an excuse for all of their layoffs. It became a trend, and now it's normalized to have a bunch of layoffs around. And part of that is about right sizing. Part of that is about, we made mistakes in hiring. So some of it is, with layoffs specifically, is overcorrecting mistakes that were made earlier or further upstream in the cycle.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Leading Below the Surface podcast. You'll see that I have two guests, especially if you're watching us on YouTube. If you're not watching us on YouTube, follow the channel. It's much better to follow along on YouTube than on audio, so you can see our faces and everything that we talk about. So today I have two really fun guests. So they're both HR people. So maybe fun isn't the word. And that's what we're actually going to talk about is HR. Are they our friends? And I've been, the reason what inspired this episode is I've been seeing so much, and all of you have been too, around layoffs, how they've been done, around just HR folks, just doing us dirty. And I was really interested in this because I actually know quite a few HR people, and I came from HR, unfortunately. My last job, I got out of it, which was great, but I kind of got trapped there for a while. So I'm going to introduce our guest briefly, and I'm going to have them introduce themselves more. As I do every single time, I'm going to introduce them how I know them, and then they can give you the professional intro, and then we'll leave more in the show notes. You know the drill. So I'm going to start with Turiya, who, I think we met through Nicole, the sign, who runs a design thinking group. And then she also knows Gina Flagg, who I've met Gina Flagg through some other things. We've talked. It's like small Chicago community. Since then, Turiya and we've just become friends. And I just love our conversations. We talk about everything. We talk about this HR thing, who we can trust, who we can't. And so I really love how authentic things have become between us. She's also a podcaster. She's going to tell you a little bit about that. Krista as well, podcast. We met at this great conference called the Responsive Conference. It's in California. I think it's in October. It's a really great generative conference. I highly recommend it. And I'll be talking more about that a little bit later. I think I'm going to go this year, but we'll get to that. Krista's also a podcaster as well. So Turiya, let's start with you. What did I miss? And then Krista, we'll get to you. What did I miss?
So yes, we met through Nicole and then reconnected when I think you did some work at one of Gina's past organizations, a company that Gina was working at. And she said, we've got to have LaTonya Wilkins on our show to talk about her book. And so you joined our podcast. And just to pivot from that for a second, yes, I co-host a podcast called HR Unconfidential. It launched in March 2018. So we are just over 8 years old now and coming up on our 100th episode. And so you were a guest few years ago. And although you've been very open and honest about your overall concerns with the HR profession, I'm a delight. And so you probably love me.
You are kind of.
Yeah, I am. But I'm a career-long HR person for upwards of, 25 years now in all different types of companies, and was most recently the chief people officer at a tech company, and now serve as a fractional chief people officer for multiple clients. I've been doing that for the last several months, and I'm sure part of this conversation will probably get into why that was the right move for me right now. I think I'm over the HR profession, as a lot of people are.
I love her confidence. I'm a delight. She knows what's up. And I love the self-love, because I think that's really where we have to start with everything, especially in these times. Krista, what did I miss?
Well, just picking up where Turiya left off, I have a little tagline on my Facebook profile that I've had forever because someone meant it as an insult, but I actually really like it. They called me secretly not boring. I don't know. It's it kind of works. It kind of fits the vibe. But yeah, I am Krista Lane. I have a podcast also, but it's much younger than Turiya's, just about a year or a little over a year old, called HR Peep Show that I co-host with two other colleagues of mine. We like to pull back the curtain of HR and have some real talk. I am also in fractional HR for probably similar reasons that Turiya is. It works. It works for me. I really love to support small businesses and nonprofits and startups, thinking about what we can do to bring HR into the employee life cycle and company life cycle a bit earlier than most companies think they should. And hopefully build sustainable businesses from the beginning, or from earlier at least than they normally do.
It's funny that you're both in fractional. That's probably not a coincidence. And Krista, I love. Would you say secretly not boring? Can I call you a sleeper? Because I think that's better.
Yeah, sure.
Like a sleeper, like you meet someone, you're like, oh, that's a sleeper. Okay, you're like, and then it's like a pleasant surprise, and you're like, oh, this person's great because you've got this wit. And I've been able to get to know Krista, and I knew this was going to be such a great conversation. So I'm gonna hop right into it. So my first question to both of us, or let's just say topic of discussion, because this is not an interview. My question is HR your friend? I kind of thought they were, but then I realized quickly they were not. And I have two examples. The first example was an HR person. I was in an HR function, even though my job wasn't primarily HR. And an HR person who was in another unit, who I thought was a mentor to me, came into the conversation and basically gave me a bad performance review out of nowhere. And she didn't even tell me anything like that. It was, I mean, I'm sure HR folks, you know, the political thing, it's not even, a lot of these performance reviews aren't real. So let's talk about that. I'd love to take that in a conversation. The second one, a senior HR leader who I thought I was friends with told me to apply for a job on their team. And then they just ghosted me. I had like several interviews and then they just ghosted me. And their chief of staff reached out to me to tell me, well, they didn't even say anything. I just withdrew myself because I was like, forget this. I'm done with this. So I'd love to hear your thoughts because I thought both these people were my friends. And I think if you could even work in a little bit about the political nature of performance reviews, those are not real. I'm sorry, folks. Like I've done my agent, when I did HR, I saw the other side of that. And performance reviews are a weapon. I'm a coach. They're not real feedback. So I'd love to get both of your ideas on that.
First of all, oof, that sucks in both cases. I do think that performance management and like feedback in general are great and should be encouraged. What you're describing in terms of a performance review that kind of randomly, like there should never be a surprise. If it's a real performance review, there should never be any surprise. You should have had that feedback much earlier, and there should be nothing in there that surprises anybody, right? You or the manager, if it's real, right? If it's not, then obviously there's other things going on. I find that more often that's a problem of scale than it is of, infrastructure. Like the infrastructure has not scaled properly if that's what's happening. The incentives are misaligned. The departments are told that they have to only promote the top 10% or something. And then that changes the incentives to good performance for everybody and makes it competitive, which is not ideal for anybody. And that it's more of a culture of fear that you end up operating under instead of a culture where you're trying to actually grow and develop people. So I agree with you that they're not great if that's the positioning, but I do think they can be helpful. And I also have a little bit of empathy for that leader, only because I assume, based on how I have seen this go down, that they probably were not in control of the results of that review. There is often some other top-down decision that they can't disclose that's somebody else made a last-minute change that you had no control over, and there is nothing you can do except be the person who has to deliver the news.
Yeah, and that's exactly right.
Yeah, it's a disempowering place to be in, and it's like awful for that manager, but it's also awful for the employee who has to like suffer that.
My first question to you, LaTonya, is in both of those examples, what made you think they were your friend?
Ooh, good question.
Like, was it because they were HR professionals, or was it because you just thought you had a connection? Because the first one you mentioned was like you thought was a mentor, and the second person, it sounds like it was someone who was in your network who had this job open. Because I just want to come right out and say HR is not your friend. I didn't get a job to be people's friends, right? And we can get into my personal mindset about why that expectation of HR is somewhat valid, but also problematic. We can talk about that a little bit later. But I don't know that any role in the workplace is structured to be people's friends, because it's a workplace. Of course, everybody makes friends at work, right? And I know that it's a huge part of our life. But I just want to flat out say HR is not your friend. There's a lot of things that they should be, but they aren't anybody's friend in general. So I'm curious, what is it about your two examples made a friendship kind of expectation? And then I am also very disturbed by what you shared, and I can obviously weigh in.
I love both of your perspectives on this infrastructure process, what made me think they were my friend. And I really appreciate your honesty, Turiya. And I hope that's something you say. Like, I wish HR people would say that to people. So why there are two things. So let me give you one other wild card that happened in here. I was hired in one regime, and there's a new group coming in. I think they were just trying to find a way to get me out of there. And because I wasn't their people, like they wanted to bring in their people. I was able to we were able to figure out an agreement or whatever. But I think that's what it was. My question is, number one, is why wasn't that just framed that way? Because I would have been fine. Like, hey, this isn't working out. I'll keep stepping. The second thing, why did I think they were my friend? Because this person loved everything I did, really supported the programs that I ran, put people in those programs, would speak up for me in meetings, then turned. She later apologized to me, but I just didn't accept it. So that kind of confirms. And the other person, I was introduced to him, and he was just so enamored, and that he fast-tracked me to this interview process, and then it just died. And I was like, what? And we had lunches, and yeah, it was like personal.
There's no excuse for ghosting.
I totally get it. And I think the HR is not your friend question or perception is in a lot of ways well deserved, right? Like, I know, like the title of the function literally has human in it. And so it is the role in organizations that is responsible for the human experience. And it has a much more, what I would call, direct connection to people's personal livelihood than a lot of other jobs, right, in companies. The finance person, the marketing person, the technology leader or whatever, don't sit in a role or maybe have influence or make decisions that have such a personal connection to people and their jobs, their livelihood, and their workplace experience. So I get why the personal impact and relationship that people have with HR leads to the term friend. However, what I will say, based on what you just described, those were, and if they're listening, I don't know, but those were just crappy people.
Yeah.
Even if they were marketing professionals or finance professionals, or right, like crappy people exist in every profession. And you're absolutely right. If we got to a world where someone could have an honest conversation and say, look, there's a lot of org changes going on. We're going to need to go in a different direction. You're not our vibe. Here's what we can offer you. If we did that, performance reviews wouldn't exist. Because I agree with you. I've worked in HR for over 20 something years. I don't like performance reviews. I don't like managing the process. I don't like participating in them. But I think that's less about this idea of what I think the theory of performance management and feedback should look like, and more about the fact that for so long we've been rooted in processes, right, over people. And so when we're thinking about performance, it's more about the timeline and the rating scale and how do we use the outcomes to make pay decisions or promotion decisions or to weed people out. And it's never really about, do we have the right people set up to do the job well, to support the business, and how do we make sure they know that they're the right people, or that they are having performance issues on a regular, ongoing basis. Like you said, it's used as like a gotcha over what it really should be, which is we run a business, and in order for us to make money, we need people operating on all cylinders, and we want those people to know when they're operating on all cylinders, and we could do that every Monday, right? Like it doesn't have to be this like process and kind of over police thing that it's been for so long. So I agree with you about performance reviews in general and the concept of them. And I wish we would do differently at scale.
It's funny. I work with so many startups and other small businesses where there is not enough process. And so that's why I come from a very process oriented position where I'm like, well, if they had a good process, like it should have been better. That doesn't sound like a good process, right? But it also sounds like this, manager or HR person, whatever, like or the company in general was unwilling to have a hard conversation with you. They copped out and blamed it on you instead, which happens a lot, and it's unfortunate and it's not right. And that's also why I try to support having hard conversations on a regular basis.
Again, it was just really unnecessary. It was like, again, if it was like new leadership came in, we're going to be changing our teams. Here's six, you have 6 months or you have 3 months and we're going to reorg, like, I don't understand. So I'd love to talk more about that. Like, why can't we separate people in a humane way? That's number one. And then Turiya, you said something really interesting. And I'd love to get both of your thoughts on this. You said both those people were crappy people. But even in some of my other jobs, I won't say the order because then people can figure it out. But I'm kind of convinced that HR hires crappy people. Prove me wrong. No, I do. I think you have to hire people without a spine that really can bend to anything and bend the knee. You're both laughing, but I would love to hear if that's true. Is that a myth? Please prove me wrong.
I'll start. So you know what this reminds me of? And I don't get offended by this at all, right? Like if anybody's been paying attention to social media, like there's all these weird like gender wars going on right now, right? Like everybody's talking about how crappy the dating pool is and men are bad. And we see men jump in and say, well, not all men. And there's this moniker of, well, until it's no men, it's all men, right? Like we kind of all carry the stigma that is attached with our identity, right? Whether we like it or not. And while being an HR professional isn't the biggest part of my identity, it is what I do. It's what I chose to do over 20 some years ago. And so I don't get offended when people say they've had very bad experiences with HR, or when I meet people and they say, you're not the typical HR person. And I'm not trying to like overcompensate for that. I'm not trying to diminish people's experiences, but I'll start by saying there are horrible people in every profession. But also in a lot of professions, it does sour us, right? Like if you had a bad example or experience with a dentist or a doctor or whatever, we all have perceptions of those professions that are shaped by our individual experiences. I will say, though, I would like to believe, the optimist in me would like to believe that the majority of the profession are people that are trying to do good work, trying to build workplaces where people can be treated with respect, dignity, equity, and all those things. I think we could do a better job in, one, transparency, but also there's a part, what I would just call like courage and influence that I have experienced being missing in HR professionals. And it's a big part of the reason kind of why we are in the state of the workplace we are today. Because some people get into positions of influence and power and they assimilate, right? They just adapt either for their own protection, their own job security, or proximity to power gives them a bit of a boost of an ego. But again, I think that exists in every profession. It's just impacted differently in the HR profession because we are often the face, the voice, or the architects of things that impact people's lives and their jobs and livelihoods. I would also say I know a ton of crappy HR people. And over the course of my career, I have a specific way that I interview, HR folks. I've gotten to a point in my career where I'm leading HR teams and functions and making hiring decisions. And I've got ways that I weed out the crappy. I have worked for crappy HR leaders. I don't like this term because it's a little sexist, but it's valid because the HR profession is upwards of like 70% women. But I've been in HR departments where it's a ton of mean girl. They're gossipy or they're how they honor the access to private and confidential information that we have about people is not always effective. The flip side of that, though, is a lot of people don't understand that there are so many HR folks who are fighting the good fight behind the scenes, trying to push leaders and organizations to do things differently, have better ways of communicating things like what you described, and are just not listened to. And at that moment, they have a choice to try to minimize harm wherever they can, either fall on the sword or leave, right, their organizations or become whistleblowers, right, depending on the severity of the situation. So I've heard horrible layoff stories. I think we've all seen on social media the big layoffs and even major technology companies with large HR infrastructure where folks just wake up to an email that's saying your account will be shut off in an hour. But I'm going to say every HR person that I know has really worked hard to have robust, communication plans. They try to coach leaders to be very transparent and direct about what's happening in the business or what's happening with somebody's job, similar to the situation you described. And at the end of the day, we don't make those final decisions. We could be bolder, we could be louder, we could influence differently, but we are often not the final decision makers in how some folks, execute a lot of these things. And so I accept the concerns, I accept the pushback and the negative perception of HR because it's a community that I'm a part of. I also just want people to understand where the elements of control versus influence and decision-making really exist in a company. And I choose to believe that the majority of the time we have HR people that are trying to push against those things behind the scenes, and the average employee just doesn't see that.
Well, it looks like, Krista, you agree with this. And so but see, what I want to do is move to the next question that I have. And again, this is not an interview, but next topic. But so based on what Turiya said, I mean, it's like kind of like it's a diamond in the rough, right? If you find a person that is a decent HR person. So do you agree with that? And then who is HR really for? Because I think that's a question that I've always struggled with, because I know when I was under HR, my job was always talent, leadership, all the stuff people like. And that was, I thought it was for the people, but then HR would get really threatened or controlling about some of the stuff, even though it was for the leaders, but they'd want to, it was such an interesting dynamic, kind of like Turiya said. And again, I don't like this either, mean girls, but like, wow, like there was this clique and they had to make the decisions, but yet the business leaders are like, no, this is great. I want you to do this. And it's for them. Right. But then, so I always had this question, who is this for? Like, who is HR for? Is it for themselves? Are they trying to just make themselves look good? Is it for the business? Is it for the people? Which, Turiya, you kind of insinuated, but also that sounded like the exception rather than the norm. So I'd love to hear what you two think about this.
I think of it as like we kind of in the middle of a multi-spoke service model, sort of. We are trying to create the best outcomes for everybody involved. And so that is often balancing the needs of all of the different stakeholders, which can be really challenging, especially and like infrastructurally, of course, like, yes, we're paid by the company. So in theory, like that is our ultimate thing. But I will say the way that I often operate and interpret that is that I am for the company and not for, and for all of its people within it, not for any individual leader or, particular stakeholder. So Like I've even had clients where I've had to get involved with the board who has disagreed, like the leadership has kind of gone off the rails a little bit, and I happened to be brought in for something else, and they're like, okay, we give you authority to ignore whatever this leader says and do the things that you want to do, which is great. But and I think that's only possible because of my fractional position. Yeah, we're not for any one party. I do also believe that serving employees is how we build a better business. Like it is in service of the company as a whole, but you just have to balance what the resources and needs of the moment are against all of those other competing priorities.
Well, then is there a hierarchy?
In my mind, I agree with what Krista said. At the end of the day, we're employees of the organization. We happen to be the function in that organization that is responsible for the employee experience, right? Which is also there in service to the organization. Like none of us are volunteers. We're all there to do work, to hopefully have the company be successful and profitable so that we can get paid and go home and live our lives, right? And that's no different for the HR people. I happen to be an HR person that is passionate about the fact that the better you treat the humans at your organization, the better off they will be in their overall human experience, right? Like pay them well, don't cause a whole bunch of burnout and mental stress, don't treat them like crap. Just makes a better human experience for everybody that has to walk this earth, and it will lead to stronger business results. So I think the best HR folks know that there's a hierarchy, which does start with the organization. But that they find ways to design the HR experience or the employee experience in a way that's not harmful to the humans. Actually, it's the opposite of not harmful. It is disproportionately positive to the human experience and sets the organization up to make money so that we all get raises, bonuses, job security, or whatever in whatever ways we can. So that would be my hierarchy. I'm an employee. An individual person's name is not on my pay stub. It's the organization. Now, does that mean that I acquiesce to things that are harmful? Does that mean I won't push back? Does that mean I won't leave an organization if it's misaligned with my values as an HR professional or a human? No, not at all. But I don't ever see myself beholden to an individual leader and just kind of executing out the marching orders of an individual leader, because they're a human just like I am. They put their pants on one leg at a time. But I am also there to protect the interests of both the company and the people. And that's where, advocacy around compliance things or things that are just crappy or potentially illegal and, carefully handling employee concerns and things like that. It's out of my concern for that human, but also out of concern and my role to protect the interests of the organization, because this is a threat to all of our livelihood, right? If you've got an organization that's full of hostile work environments or harassers and, just jackasses, it's a threat not only to the human experience, but also to the overall health and sustainability of the company. And so our job all the time is navigating. If it was a Venn diagram, I'm in the middle, right? All the time.
I'm going to challenge that because I'm seeing a lot of, especially even with our clients, things like transformations. We work on a lot of transformations. And I'm seeing one of the big ones I'm seeing is AI. So if a business leader came to you and said, we are going to invest in AI and we need to lay off 20% of our workplace to do this, how would you respond to that? Feels like there's a hierarchy and you have to follow what the leader wants to do first. Or is that not the case? Because I think that's what a lot of people think. And so we're into the myths now, folks. So is that a myth? Like, is the conversation like, okay, I got my orders, I'm out? Or would it be more nuanced? Because that's not what it seems like from the outside.
I think as a general, that is a myth. Well, here's what I would say. Again, back to my previous comment, the expectation or the assumption that HR is actually the person making those decisions is absolutely a myth. I think how an individual HR person should or might handle that is absolutely going to vary. In my particular case, We've seen this happening over the last several years, right? Like every time there's a new wave in organizations, it's a chance for companies to think about how they might manage costs or productivity or whatever it may be. In my particular case, when I've been faced with a question like what you just described, I've gotten more comfortable over the course of my career and just astute enough in my role to ask the right questions. Because here's the thing, a lot of leaders don't really even know what they're saying, right? Like they haven't thought about the upstream and downstream implications of things. They're looking at a potential goal that they've been given by like the board or by their boss. And so I see it as my job and the HR leader's job to pressure test the business rationale and the human impact of every decision that we're making. And so are there HR people who would just roll over and say, okay, leader, you just gave me this very blank statement about how you want to lay off X number of people. I'm going to go help you execute that. Yes, those absolutely do exist. I think, but what makes a more effective HR person, I was in a traditional workforce when ChatGPT first hit, right? And there was all these leaders sending out emails and just making blanket statements in company meetings saying, we're going to be AI first and we're going to be more efficient and we're going to optimize our headcount. And here we are, over 4 years later, and nobody still has a real strategy and doesn't even know what that means. And a lot of the companies that ran out to do that are now having to walk back some of those things because they didn't put enough time and strategy and focus into making sure that it would really work to service their business. And so if you have an HR leader worth any weight in gold, they understand workforce planning. They understand the business and the strategic direction that the business is aiming to go in. And they know how to have advisory and influential conversations that would say, well, tell me why. And what about this? And what about the human impact? And what about productivity concerns? And what about, let's fast forward a year from now. And if this thing isn't working, how will we know that it's successful? And what does it mean for our customers? And what does it mean for the broader ecosystem of all the people that we serve? And then get to the right decision. It's not my job to say, I don't make the decision of we're not laying people off. I do have an extreme amount of influence over how we get to that decision, how we manage that decision, and how we manage the human impact of those decisions. And I agree that I don't know HR people lean in to that influence.
I also would not be surprised if there's other reasons for which we are using AI as an excuse, right? I think there were a lot of companies that used like the pandemic as an excuse for all of their layoffs, right? It became a trend. And now it's normalized to have a bunch of layoffs around. But I don't think that we've really, and part of that is about right sizing. Part of that is about, we made mistakes in hiring. So some of it is, with layoffs specifically, is overcorrecting mistakes that were made earlier or further upstream in the cycle. Or things that they couldn't anticipate or that they don't want to admit to their shareholders or to, other stakeholders or investors, whatever it is. And maybe that's a little bit conspiracy theory of me, but like I have seen it, I've seen it happen. So I know that it's more prevalent than the headlines would make it seem. Like I'm extremely skeptical that having a 20% plus layoff is named for the purpose of integrating AI, is a strategic decision by itself. There's probably a lot more going on under the hood. And I feel a lot of empathy for the HR leaders who have a lot of responsibility, but not a lot of authority or influence over those decisions because they're often doing the best that they can under circumstances and leadership that does not see their value as a strategic partner. And if they don't see that, then they won't ever appreciate what a great HR leader can bring to the table.
I don't think that's a conspiracy theory at all. It's AI right now, but again, over the course of my career, it's always been something. We're invested in some new business venture and it failed, and now they've got to make the financials look better, or just some missteps in whatever product or service that we deliver. They underestimated what their market size might look like, or how whatever it is that the business does is going to be successful. And now they are beholden to stakeholders, shareholders, board members, or whomever, to fix that. And you're right. The pandemic and AI are certainly the most recent popular reasons. I won't call them scapegoats because some of them may be true, but definitely the most prevalent reasons we're hearing lately. Yeah.
Yeah. It's funny because and that's one of the things that I think bugs people the most about HR is just tell me the truth and I'll figure it out. All of this stuff, it's even what the example I started with, it could just be a low friction. And Krista, I know you had mentioned difficult conversations, but I think these conversations could be generative. I mean, as a coach, I believe in as a coach, and I've worked with some HR executives to do this, is coaching people out of the door instead of, pushing them out or making up lies and dragging them through the mud. Just tell them, hey, this isn't working. Or I don't know what you two think of that. And then we'll kind of get to the last question. I just don't understand.
It's obvious to us in this room, but I don't think it's that obvious to every manager or every and not every manager is going to listen to an HR leader who's trying to coach them through that. Because I'll often defer. I'm like, look, this relationship that you have with this employee. I'm going to support you as best I can and encourage you to be transparent and be open and honest in how you communicate. Here are some guardrails about legally protected information that you probably shouldn't share or shouldn't talk about in that way. But you have the relationship. So there's some amount of deference that I have to have for that, just in it's going to sound weird if it's in my voice, right? Or that message, as much as I can encourage them to do that, they may not take the bait, right? Or it may not actually follow you. You can lead someone to water.
This is where I do think that you're absolutely right, Krista. All we can do is advise and push. But I do think this is an area where HR folks can push a little harder. I tell people all the time, I'm a snitch, right? I'm a tattletale. I escalate issues. And also I think, there are some things that we truly do control, right? Like we, in general, own, right? Like the PIP process, right? Like when managers want to put someone on performance improvement plan, we are, again, usually architects or curators of our any performance improvement policies that might be in place and things like that. So, and again, I know for me, this comes with just my experience and my general personality. I am an HR person who, when a manager comes to me and says, I want to put this person on a PIP, I've got 50 questions and 49 of questions are, where did you fail as a leader? Because you don't often hear that, right? And so it's questions about, well, what have you done and why now? And, where were there perhaps missteps and how they were trained or onboarded or given feedback? And it's very manager focused. I am also someone who has told my direct reports and team members, no, you're not going to partner with them to write this person on a PIP. If they've made a foregone conclusion or there's these underlying reasons, similar to what you mentioned, LaTonya, about why this person is just no longer a fit. Why are we going to waste 30 days, 45 days, 60 days on a fake PIP? And it's disingenuous. It's harmful to the employee. It's a waste of everybody's time and money. And so I've definitely been the person that have pushed back on what I would call those performative, performance discussions or performance processes. And when we have, first level or mid-level managers that don't listen, I go to their executive and say, they want to put this person on a PIP, but I also think is at the same time, they should be on one because there's a management leadership gap, right? Like I am that person. I have provided air cover and what I would call empowerment to my teams to be that person that is pushing back on managers, and not in a disrespectful way, but asking the real questions like, how did we get here? Where, you just did their performance review 4 months ago and they were rated pretty decently. And now here you are a couple months later saying they've got to go, right? Like, where was the slippery slope? Where have you perhaps missed opportunities to coach, develop, and bring them along? And sometimes people just aren't a fit. Their skills aren't there, or their willingness to improve aren't there. And, we handle that on a case by case basis, but I don't believe in pushing arbitrary processes. And again, I'm a snitch, and I know that that comes with the privilege of my title and the executive level that I've reached in my career. But I have gone to my CEO and said, this executive on your team can't even have an honest performance conversation with like their VP of sales, and they make way too much money and have way too much responsibility. This is a problem. But I know that everyone doesn't have the space to do that, to Krista's point earlier about, them not seeing us as either strategic partners or advisors. And my thing is like, lean into the things that you can control, right? Like lean into the things that you can control, push back in performance calibration sessions when you're hearing things that just don't make sense. Empower yourself and your team to push back on those leaders that come to you out of nowhere and say, I want to put this person, on a PIP, and it's clear that they haven't done their diligence to address the performance correctly, or they're using it as a ploy, right? To just push someone out. I think I was 23 when I was at a professional services firm, and there was someone who was not doing well. They ran like a sales and account management function, and the head of that function came to me and said, like, they're just not cutting it. We've had all these conversations and I want to put them on a PIP, but like, I just don't think they're going to make it. We're just buying time. And they wanted to buy time so that they could backfill the role. And I said, so we're going to do a charade, right, of putting this person on a PIP towards targets we know they can't meet, because you as a manager don't have basically a backup or an effective workforce plan on how you're going to fill. And the answer was no. And I remember saying to that manager, or you could just go to that person and say, hey, Bob, this isn't working. We've had these conversations. I don't see you being able to turn this around. We're going to go ahead and part ways, but we're going to do some sort of what I would call graceful and extended exit so that you have lead time. This is a separation for performance or non-job fit. Doesn't have to come with severance or anything, but like this is impactful to your life. So we're going to go ahead and transition over the next 2 weeks to a month. Call it a day. Wish you the best. Here's my expectations on how you're going to engage or interact over the next few weeks. Gives you time to kind of get a head start on your job search. Gives us time to kind of stabilize the team. No harm, no foul. And he was like, oh, I can do that. And I'm like, literally, yes. Literally.
I mean, it saves everybody, like you said, like it saves everybody also time and money, because a disengaged employee costs a lot of money. And then they're gonna gossip, and it just keep it moving, folks. It's like, and coaching isn't being nice. I do want to make sure I make that note, because I think a lot of folks think if you're coaching someone out instead of pushing them, forcing, that's being, it's not. It's actually a better approach, because again, then you don't have all those adverse effects. So let's move to our last question, and I'll come to you, Krista, first. But so when I say grounded HR leadership, what does that mean to you? Because I think about this a lot, especially with below the surface leadership. Like, what does that mean to you?
I think about values-driven leadership being, really, really close to those values in how you operate, in how every detail gets executed, in how every strategy gets discussed and implemented. Here's the cat. He's ready for action. For me, it's how am I integrating that into everything that I do in every day.
When I think grounded, first off, I just want to piggyback off the last comment you made. I don't strive to be nice. I strive to be kind and honest. I just want to, again, I don't think it's much of a hot take to say, as an HR professional, I don't aim to be anyone's friend at work. One, I'm an introvert and people are just generally problematic anyway. I want to do my job and go home. But I do take very seriously my responsibility to create a safe workplace for people, treat people with dignity, and to be kind, be approachable, be authentic, and just to act with integrity. And I think every profession should do that, right? Like point blank. When I grounded HR leadership, I think definitely a significant amount of what I would just call core business acumen, right? Like you got to kind of know what the business is, what they're trying to achieve, so that everything that you are doing is in support of that. To Krista's point earlier about this whole nomenclature of being, a seat at the table and being seen as strategic. Like it's kind of old. I'm tired of hearing it. And I think a lot of HR professionals that are very solid in their business acumen and show up that way, can be very influential strategic partners. I do think human centric, have a passion and general care about humanity. We spend most of our time at work. Most of our relationships are at work, and our livelihood is dependent on our jobs. And I believe every human deserves to have that time and that experience, be as effective and positive as possible. And right, wrong, or indifferent, the workplace is the majority piece of that pie, right, in terms of people's lived experience. I also think this whole idea of just courage, there needs to be a bit more courage, even when it makes you uncomfortable. And I get it. I get why people don't do that. I am a Black woman, and we have seen, hundreds of thousands of Black women exited from the workforce over the last couple of years. So I am certainly not saying go out there and put your jobs and livelihood in jeopardy, especially just given the current state of the world. But I am saying find ways that you can push, find ways that you can be louder in how you raise concerns and questions about things that are just not serving the business or the human experience. And I would say, my last comment would be just be creative, right? I think we were all handed an HR playbook, I don't know how many decades ago, that has maybe evolved a little bit, but certainly hasn't transformed with the way that work has transformed. It wasn't built for a lot of people that were in the workplace right now. So when I think about the traditional ways that a lot of HR practices are, like performance reviews, like engagement surveys, like just the recruitment experience, like we all have kind of just kept putting Band-Aids on systems and processes and constructs that, again, were rooted in something that are just not relevant right now. And so the courage and the creativity to say, I'm going to set aside the HR playbook or what the Sherms of the world or whoever told us. Exactly.
That's a whole nother episode, y'all. That's a whole nother episode.
I just want HR people to start being like, why do we do it this way?
It doesn't have to be this way. It really doesn't.
It really doesn't.
And that's almost everything that HR touches is ripe for opportunity. Literally everything, from the tactical stuff to the more like strategic initiatives, are ripe for opportunity to make them more human-centric and probably more impactful to the business, because neither our leaders or the average employees enjoy none of that shit. Like they may, like you kind of pull them kicking and screaming to do performance reviews, or as soon as you say you're in manager training for the next 6 weeks, they're rolling their eyes because nobody has time for it. And so if we were more creative, or leveraged our creativity, I won't say more creative, but leveraged our creativity to kind of disrupt, shout out to Nicole, and disrupt HR and say, like, I don't care that this is how they did it back in like the Ford plant back in 19 whatever. I don't need this process to drive, the outcomes. I think that would be a grounded HR person.
This flew by. We are at time, and I think everybody has things to do because you are fractional. So I know you're always filling your time with something. So how can people find both of you? And folks, will also leave this in the show notes, but definitely follow both of their podcasts, because again, especially if you're in the market, if you want to have more conversations about HR, both shows are fantastic. So Turiya, you can go first, and then Krista, and then we'll end.
You can definitely follow our podcast, and would welcome you to listen and follow our LinkedIn page at HR Unconfidential. As I mentioned, we'll hit our 100th episode this summer, and we're going to have a party.
Oh, I better be invited to that. I'll be checking my inbox.
You are definitely invited. So if you're in the Chicagoland area and want to check it out, just again, either connect with me on LinkedIn or follow our podcast page on LinkedIn, and you'll hear all about that as we get closer to the date in August.
I'm on LinkedIn. Don't Google my name. Although I realize, having said that, I share a name with a not safe for work star. from the 80s. I'll just put it that way. I would like to think that enough of my work has made it to the front page that I'm more relevant maybe as a search result. But anyway, the podcast HR Peep Show is around. We're everywhere you find podcasts, or I have a website, headwaters-hr.com.
Well, folks, thank you for joining us for this very episode, for this very special episode. I'm going to leave everybody's podcast. Be sure also to follow Leading Below the Surface on Spotify, Apple, or YouTube, which is our newer channel. And yeah, we'll see you next time. Thank you, everybody.